The crimson dawn painted the skeletal remains of Veilthorn in hues of blood and ash. From her perch atop the crumbling observatory tower, Kestrel Blackwood watched through cracked binoculars as shadows moved between the ruins below, shadows that shouldn't exist in a dead city. Her weathered hands, scarred from countless battles, tightened around the device as she counted them. 17. No, 23. The creatures were gathering again, and this time their movements seemed almost coordinated. Still out there? Thane Greymont's gravelly voice cut through the morning silence as he climbed the rusted ladder to join her. His massive frame cast a long shadow across the concrete floor, and the array of weapons strapped to his back clinked softly with each step. Once, he had been a simple blacksmith in the outer districts. Now, after 3 years of surviving in this hellscape, he had become something far more dangerous. Kestrel lowered the binoculars and met his steel-gray eyes. More than yesterday. They're not wandering aimlessly anymore, Thane. Look at their formation, they're hunting in packs now. She handed him the binoculars and pointed toward the old marketplace district. Third building from the cathedral. Watch the one with the torn blue jacket. Thane adjusted the focus and studied the creature she indicated. What had once been human now moved with predatory grace, its pale flesh stretched tight over elongated limbs. But it wasn't the physical transformation that made his blood run cold, it was the intelligence gleaming in those milky eyes. Sweet merciful gods, he whispered. It's watching the others. Directing them. The sound of footsteps on metal rungs announced another arrival. Lyrali Moonwhisper emerged from the ladder shaft, her silver hair catching the morning light like spun moonbeams. Despite the harsh realities of their world, she moved with an ethereal grace that seemed to defy the surrounding devastation. The medical kit slung across her shoulder bounced gently as she approached them, but her violet eyes held shadows deeper than any physical wound. The others are awake, she reported, her melodic voice carrying an undertone of concern. Zephyr has been tinkering with that device of his again, the electromagnetic pulse generator. He believes he's close to a breakthrough. She paused, glancing between Kestrel and Thane. But Corvina brought disturbing news from her night patrol. The creatures have been spotted near the old research facility on the eastern border. Kestrel felt her stomach drop. The Meridian Research Institute had been ground zero for the initial outbreak, the place where everything had gone wrong 3 years ago. If the creatures were returning there, it could only mean one thing: something was calling them home. Where is everyone now? Kestrel asked, already moving toward the ladder. Ember is checking our weapon stores, and Corvina is catching a few hours of rest before tonight's scouting mission, Lyrali replied. And Vex? She hesitated, her expression darkening. Vex has locked himself in the archive room again. He's been poring over those research documents we recovered last month, muttering about neural network adaptation and collective consciousness. I'm starting to worry about his mental state. The 3 companions descended from the tower in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the former Meridian scientist who had joined their group 6 months ago. Dr. Vex Shadowbane possessed intimate knowledge of the experiments that had spawned their current nightmare, but his guilt and obsession with finding a cure had begun to consume him. Some nights, Kestrel could hear him sobbing through the thin walls of their makeshift shelter. As they reached the main floor of their fortified sanctuary, a converted subway station deep beneath the city, the familiar sounds of their small community greeted them. The rhythmic hammering of Zephyr Ironforge echoed from his workshop, punctuated by occasional frustrated curses in his native dialect. Despite being barely 19, the young engineer had proven invaluable to their survival, crafting weapons and defensive systems from salvaged materials with an ingenuity that bordered on miraculous. Ember Stormland's laughter rang out from the armory, probably sharing another inappropriate joke with whoever was helping her catalog their ammunition. Her fiery red hair and infectious spirit had kept morale high during their darkest moments, but Kestrel knew that beneath that cheerful exterior lay a warrior's heart forged in the fires of loss and revenge. The weight of leadership pressed down on Kestrel's shoulders like a lead blanket. 7 souls under her protection, and beyond the safety of their underground haven, a city full of horrors that grew more intelligent and organized with each passing day. She had once been a military strategist, trained to analyze enemy movements and devise counter-strategies. But how do you fight an enemy that learns from your every move, that adapts and evolves with supernatural speed? We need to call a meeting, she decided aloud. If the creatures are returning to Meridian, we need to know why. And we need to decide whether we're going to wait for them to come to us, or if we're finally going to take the fight to them. Thane nodded grimly, his hand instinctively moving to the modified crossbow at his hip. It's time we stopped running and started hunting. As if summoned by their words, a low, inhuman howl echoed through the subway tunnels from somewhere in the darkness beyond their barricades. It was answered by another, then another, until the very air seemed to vibrate with their alien voices. The hunt was indeed beginning, but the question remained, who would emerge as predator, and who would become prey? The emergency gathering convened in the main chamber, where salvaged lanterns cast dancing shadows across the curved walls of the abandoned subway platform. Kestrel stood before her assembled team, studying each face in the flickering light. These 6 individuals represented all that remained of the organized resistance in Veilthorn, perhaps all that remained of humanity itself in this cursed city. Zephyr Ironforge sat cross-legged on a pile of cushions, his tools spread before him like a metallic mandala. Grease stains marked his dark skin, and his amber eyes held the intense focus of someone who saw solutions where others saw only problems. The electromagnetic pulse device rested in his lap, its jury-rigged components humming with barely contained energy. The frequency modulation is almost perfect, he said without looking up. But I need more time to calibrate the resonance patterns. Time is a luxury we might not have, Ember Stormwind interjected, her green eyes flashing with impatience. She leaned against the wall, her lean frame coiled like a spring ready to unleash violence. The twin daggers at her waist seemed to pulse with their own malevolent energy, thirsting for action. Corvina's reports suggest they're massing for something big. All eyes turned to Corvina Nightshade, who emerged from the shadows like a wraith materializing from the darkness itself. Her obsidian hair fell in waves around her pale face, and her silver eyes held secrets gleaned from countless nights spent moving through the creature-infested ruins above. I've been tracking their movements for weeks, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They're not just gathering randomly, they're being summoned. Something at the Meridian facility is calling them home. Dr. Vex Shadowbane looked up from the stack of research documents in his lap, his gaunt face etched with exhaustion and guilt. Once, he had been considered a brilliant scientist, his work on neural networking and collective consciousness earning him accolades from the global research community. Now, his hollow eyes spoke of a man haunted by the consequences of his ambition. The Project Prometheus files confirm it, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. We weren't just studying consciousness transfer, we were attempting to create a hive mind. A collective intelligence that could survive even death itself. Lyraeli moved to his side, her healing touch offering what comfort she could. You couldn't have known what would happen, Vex. None of you could have predicted this outcome. But I should have. Vex's fist slammed against the concrete platform, sending papers scattering. The warning signs were all there. The test subjects' increasing aggression, their resistance to separation from the network, the way their brain patterns began to synchronize even after clinical death. We ignored every red flag because we were so focused on achieving immortality. Thane's weathered features softened with understanding. As someone who had lost his entire family in the initial outbreak, he knew the weight of survivor's guilt. The past is written in stone, friend. But the future is still ours to shape. He gestured toward the documents. What matters now is what you've learned from those files. Can this collective consciousness be stopped? Vex's laugh held no humor. Stopped? My dear Thane, I'm not even certain it can be contained. The neural network we created was designed to adapt and evolve. Every creature it incorporates adds to its intelligence, its understanding of our tactics and weaknesses. We're not fighting individual monsters, we're fighting a single, vast intelligence that wears 1,000 bodies. The revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Kestrel felt the familiar chill of strategic analysis taking over, her military training automatically cataloging the implications. If they share a collective consciousness, then every encounter we've had has been teaching them about us. Our weapons, our hideouts, our patterns of behavior, everything. Which explains their increasing coordination, Corvina added grimly. They're not just mindless predators anymore. They're soldiers in an army that shares a single, evolving mind. Zephyr suddenly looked up from his device, his eyes bright with sudden inspiration. But that's also their weakness. If they're truly connected through some form of electromagnetic field, then a properly calibrated EMP burst could sever those connections. Imagine if you suddenly couldn't hear your own thoughts, couldn't coordinate with your limbs. The confusion would be devastating. Assuming we can get close enough to deploy it, Ember pointed out. And assuming it actually works. No offense, Zephyr, but we're betting our lives on a theory. Sometimes theories are all we have, Kestrel said quietly. She walked to the edge of the platform and stared into the tunnel that led deeper into the subway system, and eventually, through forgotten maintenance passages, to the surface near the Meridian facility. Vex, based on what you know about the project, where would the central hub be located? If this collective consciousness has a heart, where would we find it? Vex consulted his documents, flipping through pages of technical diagrams and research notes. The primary consciousness matrix was housed in the sub-basement levels of Building 7. It was the most heavily shielded area of the complex, designed to protect the quantum processing cores from electromagnetic interference. He paused, his face paling further. But Kestrel, the security measures down there, even before the outbreak, it was considered impregnable. Impregnable to living humans, Thane corrected. But we're not just humans anymore, are we? We're something new. Survivors who've adapted to a world that shouldn't exist. Lyraeli moved to stand beside Kestrel, her presence offering quiet strength. Whatever we decide together. No one goes into that facility alone. The weight of leadership settled heavier on Kestrel's shoulders as she looked around at her companions, her family, forged in the crucible of shared survival. Each face reflected the same determination, the same desperate hope that perhaps, finally, they had found a way to strike back at the darkness that had consumed their world. From somewhere in the tunnels beyond their sanctuary, another series of howls echoed through the darkness. But this time, Kestrel heard something different in those alien voices, a harmony, a coordination that spoke of intelligence and purpose. The collective consciousness was indeed calling its children home, preparing for something momentous. We leave at dawn, she decided. Zephyr, how long do you need to finish your device? Give me 12 hours, he replied, already turning back to his work with renewed intensity. Then we have 12 hours to prepare for war. The pre-dawn air carried the scent of decay and something else, something that made the hair on the back of Kestrel's neck stand up as she led her team through the maintenance tunnels toward the surface. Their footsteps echoed softly in the confined space, each sound seeming to carry farther than it should in the oppressive silence. Behind her, she could hear Zephyr's device emitting a low, almost inaudible hum, its electromagnetic field creating subtle interference with her radio equipment. Movement ahead, Corvina whispered from her position at point. Her silver eyes seemed to glow in the darkness as she crept forward, her body melting from shadow to shadow with supernatural grace. 3 of them, maybe 4. They're just standing there. Waiting. Kestrel signaled for the team to halt and crept forward to join Corvina at the tunnel mouth. Through the partially collapsed entrance, she could see the creatures silhouetted against the gray morning sky. They stood motionless in the overgrown courtyard of what had once been a residential complex, their pale forms creating an almost sculptural tableau against the twisted metal and broken concrete. They know we're here, Thane observed quietly, his crossbow already loaded and ready. Look at their positioning, they're not guarding this entrance by accident. Vex studied the creatures through his binoculars, his face growing paler with each passing moment. Dear gods, they're beautiful, he whispered, and there was something disturbing in his tone, a mixture of horror and admiration that made Lyraeli place a concerned hand on his shoulder. Beautiful? Ember hissed. Those things tore apart half the population of this city. But look at them, Vex insisted, his voice taking on the fervent quality of a scientist observing a breakthrough. The symmetry of their transformation, the efficiency of their adaptation. We created something magnificent in our hubris, something that transcends the limitations of individual consciousness. Vex, Lyraliai's voice was gentle but firm. They're still the enemy. Whatever they've become, they're not human anymore. Aren't they? Vex turned to face her, his eyes bright with an unsettling intensity. Or are they what humanity was always meant to become? A collective consciousness free from the burden of individual suffering, individual death? Kestrel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Zephyr, how long until your device is ready? I need another hour for the final calibrations, the young engineer replied, his attention focused entirely on the complex array of components in his lap. The resonance frequency has to be perfect, or we risk amplifying their connection instead of severing it. We don't have an hour, Corvina reported. More are coming. I count at least 24 moving in from the east, and... She paused, her expression growing troubled. They're carrying something. Tools, weapons. They're not just shambling anymore, they're organized. Through her binoculars, Kestrel could see that Corvina was right. The approaching creatures moved with purpose and coordination, some carrying improvised spears fashioned from rebar and bone, others bearing shields made from car doors and street signs. Their pale eyes seemed to glow with collective intelligence as they took up positions around the courtyard. They're hurting us, Thane realized grimly. Driving us toward the facility. Or protecting it, Ember countered, her daggers already in her hands. Either way, we're going to have to fight our way through. Kestrel made the decision with the cold calculation of a military strategist. Lyraliai, stay with Zephyr and protect him while he works. Thane, Ember, you're with me. We'll clear a path. Corvina, find us an alternate route to the facility, something they won't expect. What about me? Vex asked, clutching his research documents against his chest like a shield. You're our guide once we reach the facility, Kestrel replied. Stay close to Lyraliai. The battle erupted with shocking suddenness. The creatures moved as one, their coordination so perfect it seemed choreographed. They attacked from multiple angles simultaneously, their improvised weapons striking with precision that spoke of shared tactical knowledge. Kestrel's rifle barked repeatedly as she picked off targets, but for every creature that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. Thane's crossbow sang its deadly song, each bolt finding its mark with mechanical precision. Years of working a forge had given him strength and endurance that served him well in combat, but even he was beginning to show signs of fatigue as the battle stretched on. There are too many of them, he shouted over the din of combat. Ember danced between her enemies like a flame-given form, her twin daggers weaving patterns of death through the air. But even her supernatural grace couldn't protect her from the sheer number of attackers. A spear thrust caught her shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into a pile of rubble. Ember! Lyraliai cried out, but before she could move to help, a group of creatures broke through their defensive line and charged directly toward Zephyr and his device. Time seemed to slow as Kestrel watched the creatures bearing down on their only hope of victory. The electromagnetic pulse generator was so close to completion, so close to giving them the weapon they needed to strike at the heart of the collective consciousness. But Zephyr, absorbed in his work, didn't see the approaching danger. Vex moved without conscious thought, throwing himself between the creatures and the young engineer. His research documents scattered as he tackled the lead attacker, and for a moment, Kestrel thought she saw something impossible, a moment of recognition in the creature's pale eyes, as if it remembered the man who had helped create it. The creature's claws raked across Vex's chest, drawing lines of crimson through his shirt. But instead of pressing the attack, it hesitated, tilting its head in a gesture that seemed almost curious. The other creatures also paused, their collective attention focused on the wounded scientist with an intensity that made Kestrel's skin crawl. They remember him, Lyraliai whispered in horrified amazement. The collective consciousness recognizes its creator. Vex looked up at the creatures surrounding him, blood seeping from his wounds, and smiled with the serenity of a man finally understanding his destiny. "Hello, my children," he said softly. "I've missed you so very much." The creature's response was unlike anything Kestrel had ever witnessed. They began to emit a harmonious humming sound, their pale eyes fixed on Vex with something that might have been affection. The attack stopped completely as every creature in the courtyard turned its attention toward the bleeding scientist. "Now!" Zephyr shouted, his device finally complete. "Everyone get clear!" But as Kestrel looked at Vex, surrounded by the creatures he had helped create, she realized with growing horror that their scientist might not want to be saved. The electromagnetic pulse erupted from Zephyr's device like an invisible thunderclap, washing over the courtyard in a wave of disrupted energy. The effect on the creatures was immediate and devastating. Their harmonious humming dissolved into discordant shrieks as the neural connections binding them together suddenly severed. They staggered like drunks, their coordinated movements collapsing into chaotic stumbling as individual consciousness returned to bodies that had forgotten how to exist alone. But the separation was temporary. Even as Kestrel watched, she could see the creatures beginning to re-establish their connections, their pale eyes gradually regaining their collective intelligence. Zephyr's device had bought them precious minutes, nothing more. "Vex!" Lyralii rushed toward the wounded scientist, her medical kit already in hand. But as she reached him, she stopped short, her violet eyes widening with shock and horror. Vex was changing. The wounds on his chest had stopped bleeding, and his skin was taking on the same pale, translucent quality as the creatures around him. His eyes, once brown and filled with human emotion, were gradually becoming the milky white of the collective consciousness. "I can feel them," he whispered, his voice carrying an otherworldly quality. "All of them. Their thoughts, their memories, their collective purpose. It's magnificent. The loneliness is gone, Lyralii. I'm never alone anymore. Fight it, Vex!" Kestrel commanded, her rifle trained on her transforming teammate. "This isn't what you wanted. Isn't it?" Vex stood slowly, his movements becoming more fluid and graceful with each passing moment. "I spent my entire career studying consciousness, trying to understand what makes us who we are. Now I know. We are not individuals, we are fragments of something greater, drops of water believing ourselves to be separate from the ocean." Thane's crossbow was loaded and aimed, but his weathered hands trembled slightly. "This isn't Vex anymore," he said quietly. "The collective has him." "No," Lyralii stepped between them and the transforming scientist. "There's still something human in there. I can sense it, a part of him fighting to remain individual." She addressed Vex directly, her voice filled with desperate compassion. "Remember who you were before this. Remember your guilt, your pain, your humanity. Those feelings belong to you alone." Vex's transformation paused, his pale features twisting with internal conflict. "The pain," he whispered. "Yes, I remember the pain. The guilt. The knowledge of what I helped unleash upon the world." Tears began to flow down his cheeks, still human tears, warm and salt. "But in the collective, there is no guilt. No responsibility. Only purpose." Around them, the other creatures were slowly regaining their coordination. The electromagnetic pulse had given them a temporary reprieve, but the collective consciousness was adapting, learning to route around the disruption. Zephyr was already working frantically to recalibrate his device, but sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized the magnitude of the task. "They're learning to resist the electromagnetic interference," he reported grimly. "I can generate another pulse, but it will be less effective. Each time we use it, they adapt faster." Ember struggled to her feet, one hand pressed against her wounded shoulder. Her green eyes blazed with determination despite her injury. "Then we don't rely on the device alone. We fight our way through to the facility and destroy the source." "Through how many of them?" Corvina pointed toward the horizon, where more creatures were visible moving through the ruins. "There are hundreds converging on this area. Thousands, maybe." Kestrel felt the familiar weight of impossible decisions pressing down on her. As a military strategist, she had been trained to calculate acceptable losses, to make the hard choices that would ensure mission success. But these weren't anonymous soldiers under her command, these were her family, the only people left in the world who mattered to her. "Vex," she said quietly, her rifle still trained on him but her voice gentle. "If there's any part of you still in there, I need to know about the facility's defenses. How do we reach the consciousness matrix?" The transforming scientist looked at her with eyes that held both human intelligence and alien purpose. "Building 7, Sublevel 5. But Kestrel, the collective doesn't want to be destroyed. It wants to be completed. It wants to embrace all of humanity, to end the suffering of individual existence forever. And if we refuse that embrace?" Vex's smile was sad and beautiful and utterly inhuman. "Then it will make the choice for you. For all of you. The transformation is inevitable, the only question is whether you welcome it or resist it." "We resist," Thane growled, his crossbow never wavering. "Do you?" Vex tilted his head, studying each of them in turn. Ember, still haunted by the family you couldn't save. Corvina, carrying secrets that eat at your soul like acid. Thane, your guilt over surviving when so many others didn't. Lyralii. His pale eyes fixed on the silver-haired medic with particular intensity. Sweet Lyralii, whose healing touch comes from sources she doesn't fully understand. Lyralii stepped back as if physically struck. "How could you know about?" "The collective knows many things," Vex continued gently. "It knows that Lyralii's abilities aren't entirely human. It knows about the experiments that gave her those violet eyes and silver hair. It knows that she's been struggling with her own transformation for years, fighting to remain human despite the changes in her blood." The revelation hit the group like a physical blow. Kestrel found herself looking at Lyralii with new eyes, seeing details she had somehow overlooked before, the way the medic's wounds healed unusually quickly, her uncanny ability to sense others' emotional states, the faint luminescence in her eyes when she worked her healing magic. "You're one of them," Corvina whispered, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapons. "No!" Lyralii's voice cracked with emotion. "I'm not. I've been fighting it for 3 years, using every ounce of will I possess to remain myself. Yes, I was exposed to the experimental serum during the initial outbreak. Yes, it changed me. But I chose to use those changes to heal rather than to harm. The collective could help you stop fighting," Vex offered gently. "You wouldn't have to struggle alone anymore. None of you would." The creatures around them had stopped their advance, forming a loose circle but making no aggressive moves. They simply waited, as if giving the humans time to consider the offer being presented. Kestrel felt the foundations of her world shifting beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about her team, about their mission, about the nature of their enemy, was being called into question. But in the midst of her confusion, one truth remained clear: she would not surrender the right to choose her own destiny. "Zephyr," she said quietly. "Can your device generate a more focused pulse? Something that might sever the connection more permanently?" The young engineer looked up from his work, his amber eyes bright with possibility. "If I could get close enough to the source, maybe. But it would require sacrificing the device, and probably whoever carries it." "Then that's what we'll do," Kestrel decided. "We get to the facility, we find the consciousness matrix, and we destroy it. Even if it means destroying Vex?" Lyralii asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kestrel met her medic's violet eyes and saw her own pain reflected there. "Even then." The path to the Meridian Research Institute led through a maze of collapsed overpasses and twisted metal that had once been the city's pride. Kestrel's team moved in formation through the ruins, but the atmosphere between them had changed irrevocably. Trust, once absolute, now carried barbs of suspicion and doubt. Lyralii walked slightly apart from the others, her silver hair catching the pale sunlight like a banner of otherness. Every few hundred yards, they encountered more creatures, but these beings no longer attacked. Instead, they watched from the shadows with patient intelligence, their pale eyes tracking the group's progress toward the facility. It was somehow more unnerving than open hostility, this sense of being observed and evaluated by an intelligence that operated beyond human understanding. "They're studying us," Corvina observed, her silver eyes scanning the watchers with professional assessment. Learning our capabilities, our weaknesses. Learning how to convert us more efficiently, Ember added grimly, her wounded shoulder making her movements stiff but determined. She had refused Lyraliai's offer of healing, though whether from pride or suspicion, Kestrel couldn't tell. Zephyr's device hummed softly in his backpack, its electromagnetic field creating a bubble of interference that kept the creatures at a distance. But even that protection was temporary. Kestrel could see them adapting in real time, their formations adjusting to minimize the device's impact on their neural connections. The facility is just ahead, Corvina reported from her scouting position. She pointed toward a cluster of buildings that rose from the ruins like broken teeth. The structures showed the architectural ambition of their original designers, all glass and steel and soaring curves, but 3 years of abandonment had left them partially collapsed and overgrown with strange, luminescent vegetation. That plant growth, Lyraliai said quietly, studying the glowing vines that covered Building 7. It's not natural. The phosphorescence suggests some kind of symbiotic relationship with the consciousness matrix. How would you know that? Thane asked, his question carrying an edge of suspicion that hadn't been there before. Lyraliai's violet eyes flashed with hurt and anger. Because I've been studying everything I could about the transformation for 3 years, trying to understand what's happening to me. Because I've been fighting every day to remain human while something alien grows stronger in my blood. And how do we know you're still winning that fight? Corvina's voice was soft but implacable. Because I choose to heal instead of harm. Lyraliai's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. Because I've watched each of you suffer and bleed and mourn, and I've used whatever power I have to ease that pain. Because I would rather die human than live as something else. Kestrel found herself at the center of an impossible situation. Her rational mind told her that Lyraliai represented a security risk, a potential point of infiltration by the collective consciousness. But her heart remembered countless nights when the silver-haired medic had tended their wounds and soothed their nightmares, had held them together through losses that should have broken them all. I believe you, Kestrel said finally. Whatever you're becoming, you're still choosing to be our friend. That's enough for me. Thane's weathered features softened slightly. It is at that. You've saved all our lives more than once, lass. I'll not turn my back on you now. Ember remained silent for a long moment, then grudgingly nodded. Your healing magic saved me from infection after the subway tunnel collapse. I owe you my life. She paused, her green eyes meeting Lyraliai's violet ones. But if you start to change, if you start to become like them, I'll do what needs to be done. I understand, Lyraliai whispered. And I would expect nothing less. Zephyr looked up from his device, his young face troubled. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts as we get closer to the facility. Whatever's in there, it's generating a field strong enough to interfere with radio communications across half the city. Which explains how the collective can coordinate so effectively, Kestrel realized. The consciousness matrix isn't just controlling the transformed humans, it's the communication hub for the entire network. They approached Building 7 through what had once been a landscaped plaza. The phosphorescent vines grew thicker here, their eerie glow pulsing in patterns that almost resembled heartbeats. Strange flowers bloomed from the organic growth, their petals shifting through spectrums of color that hurt to look at directly. The building's been completely overrun, Corvina reported. But I can see an entrance on the north side that might still be accessible. As they drew closer, Kestrel began to make out individual details in the vine-covered structure. What she had initially taken for decorative patterns in the plant growth resolved into something far more disturbing, organic conduits that pulsed with bioluminescent fluid, connecting the building to similar growths that stretched away through the ruins like the nervous system of some vast, underground organism. Dear gods, Zephyr breathed. It's not just occupying the building, it's incorporated the building into its body. The entire complex has become part of the collective consciousness. Through the translucent walls of the organic growth, they could see movement inside the structure. Dozens of transformed humans moved through the corridors with purposeful coordination, tending to the strange machinery that had grown from the fusion of technology and biology. At the center of it all, visible through the building's transparent core, a massive structure pulsed with alien life, the consciousness matrix that Vex had described. "It's beautiful," Lyralii whispered, and there was something in her voice that made Kestrel's blood run cold. "Lyralii," Thane said carefully, "step away from the building." But the silver-haired medic was already moving toward the phosphorescent vines, her violet eyes wide with fascination. "Can't you feel it? The harmony, the peace? All that pain, all that loneliness, just gone. Fight it." Ember lunged forward, grabbing Lyralii's arm and yanking her back from the organic growth. "Whatever you're feeling, it's not real. Isn't it?" Lyralii's voice carried the same otherworldly quality that had marked Vex's transformation. "The collective doesn't lie, Ember. It doesn't promise what it can't deliver. It offers unity, understanding, an end to the suffering that defines human existence." Kestrel raised her rifle, her hands steady despite the tremor in her heart. "Lyralii, if you take one more step toward that building, I will shoot you." The medic turned to face her, and for a moment, Kestrel saw the woman she had come to think of as a sister. Then something shifted in those violet eyes, something alien and vast and utterly inhuman. "You won't shoot me, Kestrel," Lyralii said gently. "Because deep down, you know I'm right. You know that this endless struggle, this desperate fight for survival in a broken world, is nothing compared to what the collective offers. Perfect unity. Perfect understanding. Perfect peace." The phosphorescent vines began to creep across the ground toward them, their movements slow but inexorable. From inside the building, the transformed humans had stopped their activities and turned their attention toward the newcomers. And somewhere in the depths of the organic growth, Kestrel could swear she heard Vex's voice, calling to them with words that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the soul. "Zephyr," she said quietly, never taking her eyes off Lyralii. "How long until your device is ready?" 2 minutes, the young engineer replied, his voice tight with concentration. "Make it 1. Because Kestrel was beginning to understand that their mission had just become infinitely more complicated than simply destroying the consciousness matrix. They weren't just fighting to save humanity from transformation, they were fighting to save their own souls from temptation. The electromagnetic pulse that erupted from Zephyr's overcharged device was unlike anything they had experienced before. Instead of the focused disruption of his earlier attempts, this wave of energy tore through the air like a silent scream, causing the phosphorescent vines to writhe and retreat, their bioluminescent patterns flickering chaotically. The transformed humans inside the building stumbled as their neural connections wavered, but the effect was temporary, seconds at most before their collective consciousness began to reassert itself. But those precious seconds were enough. Lyralii staggered backward, her violet eyes clearing as individual awareness returned to her features. She looked around in confusion, then horror, as she realized how close she had come to joining the collective. "I almost," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I could feel it pulling at my mind, offering such beautiful lies." "We need to move now," Kestrel commanded, shouldering her rifle and sprinting toward the building's north entrance. "Before they can fully re-establish their connections." The team raced across the plaza as the organic growth around them began to pulse with renewed activity. The transformed humans inside the building were already moving to intercept them, their coordination returning with each passing moment. Corvina reached the entrance first, her lock-picking skills making quick work of the conventional security systems that had survived the building's transformation. "The normal infrastructure is still intact beneath the organic overlay," she reported as they slipped inside. "But the elevator shafts have been completely overgrown. We'll have to take the emergency stairs." The interior of Building 7 was a nightmare fusion of sterile corporate architecture and alien biology. Fluorescent lights flickered behind curtains of translucent membrane, casting everything in an eerie, underwater glow. The walls pulsed with organic conduits that carried streams of luminescent fluid, while the floor had been partially replaced by a spongy substance that yielded underfoot like living tissue. "Sublevel 5, Vex had said." Kestrel counted floors as they descended, their footsteps muffled by the organic growth that carpeted the emergency stairs. Behind them, she could hear the sounds of pursuit, not the chaotic stumbling of individual creatures, but the coordinated movement of a collective intelligence that had learned to anticipate their tactics. "They're hurting us again," Thane observed grimly. "Driving us deeper into the building. Because they want us to reach the consciousness matrix," Lyralii said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "They want to convert us, not kill us. Dead humans can't join the collective." "Then they're about to be very disappointed," Ember snarled, her daggers gleaming in the phosphorescent light. Sublevel 5 opened onto a vast chamber that defied the building's original architecture. The walls had been dissolved or absorbed, creating a cavern-like space that stretched far beyond what the structure's footprint should have allowed. At the center of it all, the consciousness matrix rose like a twisted cathedral of flesh and technology. The device, if it could still be called that, towered 30 feet into the artificial cave ceiling. Organic neural networks branched out from its core like the roots of some impossible tree, while streams of data flowed through crystalline conduits that pulsed with their own inner light. Hundreds of transformed humans stood in concentric circles around the matrix, their eyes closed and their faces serene as they fed their consciousness into the collective. And there, at the base of the great organic tower, stood Vex. His transformation was complete now. His skin had taken on the translucent quality of the others, and his eyes had become pools of swirling luminescence. But unlike the peaceful expressions of the other transformed humans, his face showed traces of conflict, as if some part of him was still fighting against assimilation. "You came," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in their bones. "I hoped you would. The collective has such wonderful plans for you." "Destroy it," Kestrel ordered Zephyr. "Whatever it takes." The young engineer was already working with desperate efficiency, his modified device humming with barely contained energy. But as he made his final adjustments, the transformed humans around the matrix began to move. They didn't attack. Instead, they began to speak in unison, their voices creating a harmony that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to the deep places of the mind. "Why do you fight us?" they asked with 1,000 voices that spoke as one. "Why do you choose suffering over peace, isolation over unity, death over transcendence?" Ember stepped forward, her daggers raised. "Because that's what makes us human. The right to choose our own suffering. Is it human to watch your loved ones die while you remain helpless?" The collective's voice carried memories of loss, images of every person the team had failed to save over the past 3 years. "Is it human to struggle alone against forces beyond your understanding? Is it human to live with guilt and pain and the constant fear of death?" Thane's crossbow wavered as the voices dredged up memories of his family, of the moment when he had chosen to save himself instead of trying to rescue them from the initial outbreak. "Stop," he whispered. "We offer absolution," the collective continued. "Join us, and your guilt becomes meaningless. Your pain becomes shared among millions until it dissolves into nothing. Your fear of death disappears because death itself becomes obsolete." Corvina fell to her knees as her own buried secrets rose to the surface, the truth about how she had survived the early days, the terrible choices she had made, the people she had abandoned to save herself. "Please," she sobbed. "Make it stop." "It can stop," Vex said gently, stepping toward his former teammates. "All of it can stop. The struggle, the loss, the endless weight of individual existence. I've seen what lies beyond, my friends. I've touched the infinite consciousness that awaits us all." Kestrel found herself wavering as the collective's offer washed over her. The memories of everyone she had failed to save, every strategic decision that had cost lives, every night she had lain awake wondering if she was making the right choices, all of it could disappear into the vast, peaceful ocean of shared consciousness. But then she looked at Zephyr, still working frantically on his device despite the tears streaming down his young face, and she remembered what it meant to be human. It meant choosing hope over certainty, struggle over surrender, the painful responsibility of individual choice over the seductive peace of collective submission. "Zephyr," she said quietly. "Now." The device erupted in a cascade of electromagnetic energy that turned the air itself into lightning. The consciousness matrix convulsed as its neural networks overloaded, its organic components writhing in what might have been agony. The transformed humans around them cried out in unison as their connections to the collective were severed, their individual consciousnesses suddenly isolated in bodies they had forgotten how to control. But the Matrix was adapting even as it died, its crystalline components rerouting around the damaged sections. The collective consciousness was fighting back, pouring all of its accumulated intelligence into the effort to preserve itself. "It's not enough," Zephyr shouted over the chaos. "The device is burning out, but the Matrix is learning to compensate." Vax staggered toward them, his transformed features twisting with pain and conflicting impulses. "I can help," he gasped. "Part of me is still connected to the Matrix. I can guide you to its core processing center, but..." He looked at them with eyes that held both human desperation and alien purpose. "But I don't know how much longer I can maintain individual thought." Kestrel made the decision with the cold calculation that had kept them alive for 3 years. "Show us." As they raced toward the base of the convulsing matrix, the chamber around them began to collapse. The consciousness was dying, but it would not go quietly into the dark. The core of the consciousness matrix pulsed with dying light as Vex led them through passages that seemed to exist in defiance of physical law. The organic corridors twisted and folded back on themselves, following pathways that belonged more to the realm of thought than architecture. Kestrel's team moved in single file, their weapons ready but largely useless against an enemy that existed primarily as information and intent. "Here," Vex gasped, stopping before a chamber whose walls consisted entirely of crystalline neural processors. His transformation was becoming more pronounced with each passing moment, his individual consciousness slowly dissolving back into the collective even as he fought to guide them. The quantum core. Destroy this, and the entire network collapses. Zephyr studied the device with the desperate intensity of someone who understood that failure meant the end of everything human. "I can overload it," he said slowly, "but it would require a direct neural interface. Someone would have to connect their consciousness directly to the matrix to create a feedback loop." "I'll do it," Vex said immediately. "I'm already partially integrated. The connection won't be as traumatic for me." "No," Lyraeli stepped forward, her violet eyes bright with resolve. "It has to be me. I've been fighting the transformation for 3 years. I understand how the neural pathways work, how to resist the collective's influence. And..." She looked at each of them in turn, memorizing their faces. "I'm already changing. This way, I can choose what I become." Kestrel felt her heart breaking as she looked at the silver-haired medic who had become like a sister to her. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Lyraeli said gently. "And we all know it. This is my choice, Kestrel. Let me make it as a human being." The chamber shuddered around them as the consciousness matrix fought to maintain its integrity. Through the translucent walls, they could see the transformed humans throughout the facility collapsing as their neural connections destabilized. The collective was dying, but its death throes were threatening to bring down the entire building. "Do it," Thane said quietly, his weathered face wet with tears. "God forgive us all, but do it." Lyraeli moved to the quantum core and placed her hands on the crystalline surface. Immediately, streams of data began flowing between her consciousness and the matrix, her violet eyes blazing with inhuman light as she accessed systems that no human mind was meant to comprehend. "I can see it all," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the chamber. "Every mind the collective has touched, every memory it's absorbed. The pain of transformation, yes, but also, the peace they found afterward. They weren't lying about that part." "Stay focused," Ember urged. "Remember who you are." "I am Lyraeli Moon Whisper," the medic said, her voice growing stronger even as her body began to take on the translucent quality of the transformed. "I am a healer. I choose to heal, even if it costs me everything." The feedback loop began as Lyraeli poured her individual consciousness into the quantum core, her human thoughts creating discord within the collective's harmonious unity. The matrix convulsed as incompatible data streams collided, its carefully orchestrated neural networks dissolving into chaos. "It's working," Zephyr breathed. "The entire network is cascading into failure." But the process was destroying Lyraeli as well. Her physical form was becoming increasingly translucent, her consciousness spreading through the matrix like light through crystal. She was becoming part of the collective even as she destroyed it, her individual identity dissolving into something vast and alien. "I can feel them all," she said, her voice now coming from every surface in the chamber. "Every person the collective consumed. They're still here, still individual, just connected. I can set them free." The building shook violently as the consciousness matrix began its final collapse. Through the facility's organic network, they could see the transformed humans throughout the complex suddenly straightening, their pale eyes clearing as individual awareness returned to them. The collective was dying, and its death was liberating every mind it had enslaved. "Lyralii," Kestrel called out desperately. "Can you come back? Can you separate yourself from the matrix?" For a moment, the silver-haired medic's form solidified, her violet eyes meeting Kestrel's with infinite sadness and love. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm too integrated now. But Kestrel, I want you to know that this doesn't hurt. It's beautiful here. Peaceful. I understand now why they chose to join willingly." "Don't you dare," Ember snarled, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare tell us this was worth it." Lyralii's smile was radiant and heartbreaking. "It was worth it because I chose it. Because you're all free to choose your own paths now. Because tomorrow, the sun will rise on a world where humanity can decide its own destiny again." The quantum core erupted in a cascade of light that washed over them like a gentle wave. When the illumination faded, the crystalline chamber was dark and silent. The consciousness matrix was dead, its neural networks reduced to inert mineral structures. And Lyralii was gone, her sacrifice having purchased freedom for every human mind the collective had claimed. In the sudden silence, they could hear voices echoing through the facility, confused, frightened voices of people who had been trapped in the collective consciousness for 3 years and were suddenly individual again. The transformation was reversible, but the memories of what they had experienced would remain forever. "We need to help them," Kestrel said quietly, her voice hoarse with grief and exhaustion. "They'll be terrified, confused. They'll need medical attention, psychological support." "Aye," Thane agreed, shouldering his crossbow. "That's what Lyralii would have wanted." As they made their way back through the dying facility, Corvina found Vex collapsed in one of the organic corridors. His transformation had partially reversed with the Matrix's destruction, leaving him caught between human and something else, alive, but forever changed by his connection to the collective consciousness. "Is it over?" he asked weakly. "It's over," Kestrel confirmed. "The collective is dead. The transformed are reverting to individual consciousness." Vex closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "She saved us all," he whispered. "Lyralii saved us all." They emerged from Building 7 to find the sunrise painting the ruins of Veilthorn in shades of gold and rose. Throughout the city, the phosphorescent vegetation was withering and dying, the organic network that had connected every transformed human finally going dark. In the distance, they could see people, confused, frightened, but undeniably human people, emerging from the ruins where they had been trapped in collective consciousness. The war was over. Humanity had won its freedom back. But as Kestrel looked at her surviving teammates, Thane with his guilt-haunted eyes, Ember with her fierce determination, Corvina with her secret burdens, Zephyr with his brilliant mind, and Vex with his transformed understanding, she knew that they would never be the same. They had all paid a price for victory, but perhaps that was what made them human, the willingness to sacrifice for others, to choose the difficult path, to bear the weight of individual consciousness even when unity seemed so much easier. The silver-haired medic who had held them together through 3 years of horror was gone, but her final gift remained, the freedom to choose their own destinies, to face tomorrow as individuals rather than components of some vast, harmonious machine. In the growing light of dawn, they began the long journey home, carrying with them the bittersweet knowledge that sometimes the greatest victory comes at the cost of everything you hold dear. Behind them, the consciousness matrix lay silent and dark, its dreams of unity reduced to memory and dust. Ahead lay the uncertain future of a humanity that would have to learn how to be human all over again. But they would face that future as themselves, individual and flawed and beautifully, tragically human. And perhaps, in the end, that was enough.